Hello, Gremlins and Grandmasters. My name is TBS Guy, and here's an interesting question. What's the deal with Jax? Now, Jax, like a number of the other champions we've talked about in this video series, is one of the oldest champions in the game. He released into the game in the very first wave alongside champions like Alistar and Fiddlesticks, and since his release back then, he has really never changed in much of a substantial way. His lore has been changed up here and there, and of course there's been balance updates whenever he has needed them, and good lord, has he needed them, but the character himself, his animations, his model, and even his textures have remained remarkably consistent throughout the entirety of his history. And what's specifically interesting about Jax is that even in the modern day of League of Legends, unlike a lot of the other very old champions, he doesn't really need an update. He's got a story update that's brought him a little bit more up to speed and connected him to one of the regions in the new League of Legends universe, but outside of that, there's really not that much change that you need to make. So, let's just start by taking a look at his lore. Now, his old lore, back in the day, was that essentially he was a fighter, a soldier mercenary, someone just kind of plucked off from the middle of nowhere by an ambitious summoner who entered him into the League of Legends, and he just started winning. He just kicked everybody's ass all over the place, to the point where the League had to be like, oh, okay, no, he's clearly way the hell OP, we need to do some nerfs on him. And so they imposed some restrictions that meant that he could only fight with certain weapons that the League deemed appropriate. And he was kind of like, okay, I'll just fight with this lamppost and kick all your asses anyway. And so he did. And that was pretty much Jax. Like, that was pretty much his story back then. Now, in 2014, with the League of Legends itself being retconned out of existence, that the whole reason for his existence kind of went with it. Like, he couldn't be the most winningest, overpowered fighter in the League of Legends because the League did not exist anymore. And so, what did they do with him? Well, for a very long time, nothing. They really didn't do much with him at all, and he was just kind of left in a weird limbo where he was just this generic strong dude who fights with a lamppost to give his opponents a chance. Indeed, the thing that you can see on your screen in front of you here. This is still his bio up to this day, but fortunately, there's been a few updates and changes around Jax that have done a little bit more to expand on his character. He's got a short story called None Shall Pass, which, frankly, if you ask me, is essentially as good as giving him a proper bio. And there's not much to it. He sits cross-legged at the center of a bridge with his lamppost, and he just kind of fights a bunch of Demacians who are trying to cross the bridge, but Jax is looking for a good fight, so he's been beating the shit out of them, just one after the other. So, and he faces off against a Demacian champion of some kind, not a champion in the sense of League of Legends champion, just like a fairly strong Demacian warrior, and he just kicks his ass, and then he's like, oh, well, guess there's no challenge here. And then Fiora steps forward, and Jax is like, oh, Fiora, okay, that girl can handle a sword, this is gonna be a good fight, end of story. Now, the reason why he's doing this seems to be that he's recruiting a sidekick, as it were, or at least a warrior with strength comparable to his own, who can help him stand against the Void, specifically. So why the hell is Jax fighting the Void? Well, it's a little bit involved to try and figure out why, but specifically it's because he's an Icathian. Now, Icathia is a small nation to the south of Shurima, or rather, it was a small nation to the south of Shurima until... okay, so let's recap the story very quickly. Icathia was a sovereign nation for a long time, then a Shuriman empress basically conquered the hell out of them, and for 1,000 years they were subjects to Shurima. They were a slave people, essentially. They rebelled, they rose up, and mounted a grand rebellion against Shurima. Shurima sent their armies, and the Icathians were like, yeah, we can't beat the Shurimans just, like, through war, so they summoned the Void. They caused an enormous Void Scar to open up, and it swallowed their entire nation, along with the invading Shuriman army. Jax is one of the Shurimans, one of the Icathians who was there on that day when the Void Scar was opened, and he saw his own nation, his people, everything being consumed by the Void, and and so he resolved to set out to fight it, to do something about it, to at least help the world have a kind of fighting chance. And this is detailed somewhat in the story of where Icathia once stood by Graham McNeil, which is the story of how the Icathians opened up the Void Rift and summoned the void to the world. And in this story, we're introduced to a character called Syjax Kaelrinx Kohari Ikathan, which is a bit of a mouthful to say, but this is Jax back in his warrior days, when he was an Ikathian warrior doing warrior stuff for them. And we see him interact with a young Ikathian warrior who is driven mad by the sight of the void opening up and swallowing everything. And this is sort of, he's not really the main character of the story, but he shows up as a side character, and we get a little bit of an insight into where he came from and what kind of a person that he is. What's interesting about Jax, though, is, first of all, like I said, he has never changed since the very first days of League of Legends, which means that the character design we see before us now was not really made for these stories. The stories, rather, were made up to fit his character design later on down the line. And what's remarkable about Jax, I think, in a lot of ways, is that his character design is really versatile in that way, in the sense that, yeah, it could just be a mercenary soldier dude who fights in the League of Legends, the tournament, but yeah, you know what, it could also be one of the last surviving Ikathians sort of traveling the world looking for strong warriors to take up the cause of fighting the void. His character design works for it, to the point where even his current splash art is essentially just a copy, like a redrawing with better technique and you know, and generally better quality of his very first old original splash art. It's literally the same motif, just mildly updated, and the lamppost doesn't look like it would snap in half if someone breathed on it now. And that's really the thing that's been interesting me about Jax for a long time, is that he's so old, and his model is so clunky, and so much about his design is really kind of outdated and weird. Like, why does he have this fur lining thing on his coat? Why does his coat have a collar, like, and a hood, a collar and a hood at the same time? Because why? And he has this purple motif with these weird ornamentations on it that don't really look like anything else in the League of Legends, and yet he never looks out of place. Like, he doesn't really, unlike a character like, if you look at Ashe's oldest character model, for example, the really old one, what you'll see is a character model that plainly does not belong in the modern game of League of Legends because it was so frickin' ugly. And this is something that's true also of characters like Master Yi with his giant pizza feet, where you can clearly see, oh, this champion, yeah, this champion is ancient. They're from the before times when computers were like toasters and couldn't run anything, and the poly count on models was terrible. But Jax's character model, just through the cleverness of its design, has managed to not really age, at least not as badly as the other character models have. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not brilliant, like, it's not up to the standards of a modern League of Legends champion, but when you see him on the Rift, you know, he looks good enough. Like, he looks okay. He doesn't look outstandingly terrible. And to me, while Jax is one of those character designs who's sort of painfully generic, like, in the sense that I think you could take this character design and you could plug it into a number of other video games, fantasy or sci-fi. Like, he could fit into a lot of things. Like, I would not be surprised to see a guy looking like this in a Star Wars movie, for example. I wouldn't have a problem seeing him in Star Trek either. He could plot into pretty much any sort of fantasy story in like any Netflix show, fantasy anime. You could put him in there, and he would sort of, because he looks just outlandish enough to be foreign, but he doesn't look specifically medieval or specifically sci-fi. He can plug into a lot of things, and that sort of genericness, I think, is what has been saving him from being someone who painfully obviously needed to be updated because he was just such an eyesore that stuck out in the League of Legends game. No, he's always just been fine. Now, in many cases, that's something that you would consider a weakness in a character design. Like, when it's painfully generic, when it could fit into any aesthetic, that's a weakness of a character design. And it certainly is with Jax as well. Like, he looks like he could be part of the League of Legends universe, but he also doesn't look specifically like he's from any part of the League of Legends universe. Especially, like, he doesn't really look like he has any affiliation with any of the established regions or any of the established aesthetics. He doesn't look Demacian, he doesn't look Noxian, he doesn't look Freljordian, he doesn't look like he's from Bilgewater, he doesn't look like he's from the Shadow Isles or Ionia. He might look a little bit like he's from Ionia, but he's not from Ionia. He's from south of Shurima, and so because his nation has been subject to Shurima for 1,000 years, the thing from a character design perspective, what you would expect is to see a lot of Shuriman stuff on him, like stuff that's aesthetically similar to the kind of thing a Shuriman would wear, albeit since Icathians hate Shuriman overlordship of their nation, they might prefer to, you know, not wear the sun disk symbols at least, but wear like similarly styled kind of desert appropriate wear of some kind. Like you would expect that to be part of the aesthetic, but because his current modern lore state is that he's a world wanderer, he's someone who just wanders all over the world, looking for strong warriors, looking to become a stronger warrior himself, you can equally make the argument that, well, of course he would be a weird mishmash. Like, of course he wouldn't really fit into Icathia. He's been wandering for, I mean, probably hundreds of years now. I'm not really clear about the timeline about exactly when it was that Icathia fell. I'm sure Necrit has a great lore video on that that could tell me. But it is a long time ago, basically. It's not something that happened recently. It happened before Asir became... Asir's failed ascension to Emperor, which is like a good long while ago. So Jax is also very old. Now, there's definitely criticism. Like I said, since he's a traveler, and since he's the last remaining member of the Icathian civilization that we know about, what I would like to see from him is like some visual signifiers that he's been traveling all over the world. Like maybe he's got a trophy from Noxus. Maybe he's got like a dagger he picked up in Shurima. Maybe he's got like a gun from Bilgewater that he just kind of keeps around because he thinks guns are funny. Because who would ever use a gun when you have a lamppost? Like that kind of thing. I'd also like the lamppost to maybe have a more clear place of origin. Like it, for instance, the lamppost is something I would love to see look Piltoverian. Piltovian. Look like it from Piltover. That's the kind of thing. And like, there's all kinds of little optimizations that you can make, but they're not really critical. Like, honestly, if you gave Jax, like, a texture update, and maybe, you know, change his model a little bit so you could do some, like, slightly more fancy animation with him, I think you'd be fine. Like, I think you would pretty much... that would be enough for Jax to be viable as an aesthetic component of the League of Legends universe for the next 4 or 5 years. And it's really rare that you come across a design like that, because like I said, he's painfully generic in the sense that he could slot into a hell of a lot of different aesthetics without looking too out of place, but he's also, just because he's been associated with League of Legends for so many years, but also because he is a very specific kind of generic, if that makes any sense to you, he's also a champion who's iconic to League of Legends. Like, this guy is one of the faces of League of Legends, despite not having one. He's one of the characters that you think of when you think of the quintessential League of Legends champion, because he's been with the game for so very long, and he's pretty much always been a part. Like, there's been very few periods of time when Jax has not seen any play at all. He's sort of always been just a little bit relevant. And so he's this very interesting study of dichotomies where it's like he's painfully generic and he doesn't fit in anywhere, but he's also so specific to League of Legends that he fits in perfectly with it. And that's... I'm struggling a little bit to articulate specifically how I'm thinking about Jax, because he is this weird edge case where usually when I look at a really old champion like Fiddlesticks, I go, yeah, that's very nice, but he could really be updated, he could really have a better lore state, you could really change a lot of stuff about him. But with Jax, it's like, no, he's kind of fine. Like, yeah, you could do a lot of changes. You could give him an updated character model with a better rigging so he can do some more fancy weapon. Like, his parry ability animation is kind of crappy. Like, he just sort of spins it above his head and then things miss him. then he's immune to stuff. Where, like, with a modern animation rig, you could do some much more fancy, like, kung fu style cool weapon animation, stuff like that. But that's not really... He's sort of fine. I keep coming back to that. And that's what's been fascinating. That's kind of also been why I've been hesitant to do a video about Jax, is because I knew that if I did, I would get stuck in this kind of recursive loop where I say, well, you could change this, you could change that, but on the other hand, he's kind of fine the way he is. You kind of don't need to. There's all these little optimizations, these little improvements you could make, but it's one of those strange cases where you don't need to. He's fine the way he is, and honestly, if he still looks exactly the way he does now, 5 years from now, I don't think I would mind that much. I mean, I'd be a little, maybe it's time to give him an update soon, Riot, but I wouldn't mind that much. I do wonder what's up with the mask, though. Like, the mask is a weird thing. It's sort of a Master Yi mask, and it's never really explained why he... Like, is it like a Wuju mask? Because that would actually be, again, really interesting. He's a traveling warrior who's been seeking out different fighting styles and learning stuff it would make sense that he would be wearing a Wuju mask, right? That he would track down the Wuju masters and kick their asses in combat and learn their skills and then grab a Wuju mask and take it with him. That would work for me. One thing that we can talk about, though, is some of the changes that are necessary for his lore. Like I said, I really do like the lore state that he's in right now, is that he's this warrior who saw something absolutely fucking horrible happen, and who's like, we're gonna need to be able to fight this when it comes, and it will come. And so he travels the world and just kind of makes himself this traveling unbeatable monk warrior who just kind of kicks the ass of everybody he meets in the search for someone who's worthy. Or not even, it's not even that he's necessarily trying to recruit anyone, it's just that he's trying to make sure that everybody all over the world is keeping up with their combat skills, making sure that they're not slacking off and becoming weaker as warriors. So he turns up in Demacia pretty much just to test whether they're still good warriors. That seems to be his behavior. By the way, none shall pass. There's a little side note here. I don't know if this is a direct inspiration, but there is a historical / folk legend in Japan of a monk called Benji, who runs into, I can't remember his name, another Japanese folk hero who was also a historical figure. And it's very much like Robin Hood and Little John meeting on the bridge, and sort of Little John going, oh, you shall not pass here until you pay the toll or whatever, and Robin Hood goes, I damn well will pass, and Robin Hood manages to beat him, and then Little John follows Robin Hood around. It's pretty much the same story, but it happened in a Japanese context. Now, this is a story that you'll find all over the world. It's a kind of very common folklore mythos thing, but the thing that this specifically reminded me on was Benkei, not Benji, Benkei on the bridge, where he stands because he has sworn an oath to take 1,000 swords from various warriors in order to repay some kind of a penance or some kind of a debt, or maybe because of some oath he has sworn. It varies a bit from telling to telling. But the point of me bringing all of that up is that I thought that was a very clever way to go with him, in the sense that this character is already kind of a weird artifact, a weird sort of a character who fits in, but who also doesn't fit in, and sort of doesn't really make any sense except in the context of having been with the League of Legends for so many years. So why not lean into that? Why not make him literally a folkloric character in the League of Legends canon itself, a character who's just been around for so long and done so many things that he can look weird and out of place, but it's okay because he's sort of not really real. He's sort of a little bit of a fairy tale kind of a character, in the same way that Robin Hood and Little John are, in the same way that Benkei and the goddamn guy he meets on that bridge, whose name I can't remember, which is annoying me because I read a book about it just the other day. Like that he's sort of slotting in. The thing that's clever is that we have this folkloric mold. The character on the bridge who is defeating everybody who tries to cross the bridge until our hero comes along and bests him. And so to take that character and say, okay, but the reason why he's on that bridge, the reason why he's fighting people, the reason why he's besting them, is because he's trying to make sure that the world is full of strong warriors. He's trying to make sure that the world can defend itself from a horror that only he truly understands, which is the horror of the void. Speaking of which, returning to his character design, his visual design for a second, something I keep failing to touch on. What's up with the three-fingered hands and the two-toed feet there? Is that what all Icathians look like? We don't really know, because Icathians, even in the story where Icathia once stood, are never really physically described. Like, at least insofar as I could tell, there was never a moment where it's like, I hold my sword in my 3 fingers because I'm Icathian, and Icathians have 3 fingers. No. It seems to be very much a Jax kind of thing, and what's curious to me is about whether, was he changed by his contact with the Void? Did the Void mess with him maybe a little bit, and mess with his physical features, or is this just what Icathians look like? There's an interesting speculation in that, because again, Jax is largely a faceless character. Well, he's entirely a faceless character. He doesn't have a face. He doesn't really even have physical attributes. Like, you look at this robed figure with all the heavy cloak and the big robes and sort of the big baggy pants and stuff like that, you can't really tell what his physique is like. Is he big and strong and burly and muscular, or is he more of a slim and slender type? He could really be either. And the same thing with his face. It's like, what kind of face is under that? How many eyes does he have? Does he have 6 eyes like his mask would indicate, or is it just 2? Is he somehow humanoid underneath there, or is he an insect of some kind? There's really no way to tell, which is part of what makes it easy to slot him, like to put him in Star Trek and Star Wars, or Firefly, even if you wanted to. Maybe not Firefly so much. It's been a while since I watched that show. But like, you could put him pretty much anywhere, and he would kind of work as this weirdo alien stranger creature. And that's partly because he doesn't have a face. He doesn't have a body. He doesn't. He only really has a big floppy outfit and some blue hands and some toes with weird numbers of digits on the end. And I wonder if there's a plan somewhere down the line to address why he looks like that, or whether that's just what all Icathians look like. I kind of want it to be just what Icathians look like. I think that would be pretty cool. But yeah, is there anything else I have to say about him? No, this was always going to be kind of a rambly video. Like I said, he's one of those weird edge cases where it's like, I could talk forever about all the stuff that you could change about him, all the things that you could alter and optimize, and the little details you could add in order to just get a little bit more in there, but I would never be able to make a compelling argument for why it's extremely necessary or urgent. Anyway, this has been a fun little return to talking about League of Legends champions and to doing the What's the Deal videos at all. So if you've enjoyed this, the like button. There's a like button, subscribe, the bell icon. Blah, 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 YouTube. Right? You know what it means. And if you didn't like this video, well, I guess fair enough. There is a dislike button that you can click, although I should warn you, if you wish to click the dislike button first, you must answer me these questions 3, and I hope you've been reading up on your relative airspeed velocities of various bird species, because might come in handy to you a little bit later down the line. Then, you must pass through the Cave of Trials, where, like, you have to answer some riddles, like there's some climbing puzzles, and there's a little section, which is like I think it's like mostly a QTE section, and it can be kind of difficult if you don't know what you're doing, but just like save scum a few times and you're probably going to get through it. Then there's going to be a boss fight, and then after the boss fight, there's going to be an optional extra boss that you can do if you want to click the super dislike button, which is like an upgraded version of the dislike button with better stats. Or you can just go straight to the dislike button and then click it. But once you click it, there's going to be a countdown timer, because like the whole place is going to collapse. There's going to be like a bomb, there's going to be a countdown timer, and there's going to be falling rocks from the ceiling, so you're going to have to make your way quickly back through the labyrinth, and you're going to need your grappling hook in order to attach to the ceiling and get across, like, because all of the bridges are going to have fallen down. So you're going to need your grappling hook to get over that, and be careful, because like there's also, like, with the rocks falling, and they're going to knock you out into like an invincibility frames, and then you're just going to fall down and lose a life. Don't want to do that, but if you can, you may be able to damage boost with some of the rocks and your invincibility frames. If like you can time it right on the end, you can save several seconds on your time if you do that correctly. Then there's like a little jumping sequence, and then you get to your ship and you can fly off, and having clicked the dislike button. Anyway, thank you very much for watching.